Hi everyone, welcome back to STEM Explained. Today I'm really excited to be joined by Miss Ellora McTaggart, a biomedical engineer, entrepreneur, and CEO of Carolina Instruments. She's worked across engineering, innovation, and leadership, and is passionate about solving real-world problems through STEM and entrepreneurship. I'm especially excited to talk with her today about what it's actually like to build a company in the STEM space, the challenges behind entrepreneurship, and her advice for students interested in innovation and biotech. Thanks so much for being here today. Yes, to start off, could you just maybe give a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah,
Just
totally. So my name is Ellora McTaggart. I am UNC 2023 biomedical engineering graduate. I got very interested in research when I was at UNC and a student there. Got involved in a neuroscience lab, and we created some pretty cool eye tracking technology that allows you to track really fast movements of the eye when people are moving around freely. That's important because eyes are a very good way to get an idea of somebody's internal states, also things as far as neurological health. You can diagnose things like ADHD, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. So we had an interest in developing this technology to enhance our own neuroscience research. We do a lot of behavioral research, and that had some value in the commercial space. And so after I graduated, instead of going into a PhD, I took the startup route and started a company called Carolina Instruments. And that company is centered around commercializing this eye tracking technology. We're looking at integration into smart eyewear and some of these extended reality devices that are coming out. But then longer term, we would love to see it be used for deeper insights into these neurological conditions in a clinical context.
So, what encouraged you from going to the entrepreneurship startup idea rather than like the academic area which you already were in?
Yeah, I never anticipated that I would be in a startup or leading a startup at this stage in my career. You know, I'm 24, so pretty early on compared to a lot of founders. And there was definitely a little bit of uncertainty when I got started, just because I had been so deeply engaged in research throughout college. I started in high school and went through for about 6 or 7 years doing research and kind of saw that as my path. And it was kind of a perfect storm of opportunity for me. I joined this lab and got involved in building the early prototypes of this technology. We had created some intellectual property around it, had a patent, and I just realized that this technology could be so much more powerful if it wasn't only being used in my own research. And so it was really my desire to see this technology in the hands of other people that maybe start to think about, okay, well, what are the obstacles that actually exist to make this happen? And most of them I was ready to tackle, and I definitely didn't understand the full the full field of all the challenges that we would face in the startup space. But it was more of a recognition that if I could put some effort towards this, then perhaps it could really improve people's lives. And I was ready to put research on the back burner for that.
That was probably just like really like I don't not maybe not scary, but just also like, oh my God, how will I like do this? So what kind of like I guess what sources or just like what did you do to kind of like overcome that fear, I guess, of going right straight into like a startup?
Yeah, I started talking to a lot of people in the startup and innovation space. So UNC fortunately has a pretty good set of resources for faculty members who want to develop their technologies out of their labs. So my co-founders of the company are the neuroscience and engineering lab researchers out of the university. And so I was very fortunate to have access to a lot of those resources to kind of assess the value of the technology. We did a program called NSF iCore. That program, you basically interview potential customers and try to get an understanding of if your solution really does fit a need that they have and it's something that they'll be willing to pay for. And that was another thing that kind of solidified it for me is I saw these neuroscience researchers' faces light up when I was first doing these discovery interviews and recognized that it wasn't only something of value in our own labs. And so that was a little validation that I needed. And then I had some other support from people who had been in the space before that were kind of giving me an idea of what it was going to take to actually take this technology out. And so once I saw some of that advisement, I realized that I would have the support that I needed to, push in that direction and learn and go as I did.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think like just getting like as you said with like talking with people and seeing that oh this product has like an inspiration. I feel like that's probably was really important in starting it. Yeah.
Absolutely. We continue to do it now as we're deciding the direction that we're going to go. I'm constantly talking to people who could be interested in piloting and in the later adoption of the technology. It's a lot of my time these days is get a feel for if we're really building towards something that people truly need.
That makes sense. Like even if like for example a lot of people have this need, so I'm assuming that also probably you had to make some changes with your model and whatnot to fit all like the precise needs of like your customers, I guess.
Mhm.
So how did you identify like those specific things, I guess?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned that at first I was talking to other neuroscience researchers, and that was really my intent when I started this company. Is I said, oh well, we could sell this as a research tool, and then other researchers can use it to improve their own capability. Around the same time, we're seeing a lot of cuts to scientific funding in the federal government right now, and a lot of labs are really struggling with the grants that they usually have access to. And so that was something that also had a pretty big impact on our direction, is recognizing that a lot of these labs that we would normally sell to don't have the budgets that they usually would. So that's when we kind of started exploring some of the other applications for the technology, recognize the potential that it has for extended reality. The reason that it has value there, and what I learned through some of those conversations, is that the existing eye tracking systems that exist in some of these wearables, they are using cameras, and so they're constantly recording the eyes, and then you have to go back and have an image processor go through and segment out the data. And so battery life of having continual processing going on in these headsets is really damaging to how long you can actually use them. And so our technology removes cameras from the system, and it takes much lower power consumption. And so we're kind of realizing that these features that we need to be true about our technology have different value in different areas. And so that's when we started to explore the extended reality route, and kind of using that as a launch pad to go to the clinical applications to get some early revenue and help us build out the system.
So about the extended reality portion, I guess, could you like maybe explain a little bit more? Because I don't like, I mean, I've heard of like virtual reality, I guess. So is it similar to that or?
Yeah. So good question, because I forget that people aren't immersed in this space in the way that I am. But extended reality is kind of a umbrella term for any kind of like wearable head system in the context that we use it, where you either augment the person's view with a like totally virtual world, things like virtual reality, have the Meta Quest and things like that, where you have a screen in front of the eyes, or augmented reality, which is where you're overlaying additional information in a real world view. So the new Meta glasses are a good example of that. The Apple Vision Pro is in between. And so Apple Vision Pro, the way that it works is it records with cameras on the outside. You're seeing the world that you're in, but then it projects it on a screen. And so there's kind of this like levels of transition between how immersed you are in the real world, where you've got virtual reality, fully a screen, different world, mixed reality, where you're projecting your world onto a screen, and then augmented reality, where you're looking at the world with some additional information laid over it. So those are the areas, and all of them have very different use cases, and that's something that we're exploring as well, is because there's different levels of need for the depth of immersion in different contexts, and we're seeing them be used across a lot of spaces than just gaming. I know that a lot of people associate it with gaming, but it's being used in a lot of enterprise workflows. And so what that means is, you can imagine somebody who's in their training for a company, say an automotive technician, and if they are trying to learn how to do a certain service or practice a certain task, you can have arrows and things that are pointing them to the like component of the engine or the machine that they're working on to help guide them through that training faster, which can save companies a lot of money. And so there's a lot of ways that are kind of creative that companies are using these systems to help improve the capabilities of their workers.
It's actually really cool. I mean, when you said extended reality, I just kind of jumped through like the gaming headsets, but like the extension of that into like enterprise is really cool.
Yeah,
Well,
and it's also used. All right, it's also used in healthcare as well. So we see. I was just at a conference called Virtual Reality for Healthcare Association, and they actually have a lot of really fascinating use cases for things like treating phantom limb syndrome. So putting people who are potential amputees or people who have lost a limb into the system where they can like see the limb that they traditionally have pain in, and helping improve the pain management through these kind of systems. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases outside of just the gaming context, but the gaming stuff is what really makes the headlines and what people associate it with. But there's a lot of value outside of it.
so your like product, I guess, from Carolina Instruments, that it would be like integrated to like their tech to help them track the eyes.
Yep, exactly. So we're starting out by creating an insert that goes on the inside of the headset. So you can imagine when you have like a big virtual reality headset on, we're creating an insert that goes in that space between the eyes and the system, and then we'll stream our data in to start, just because we have to have some kind of base level data set for how well our technology actually performs. And then our next goal as a company is to some of these integration evaluations underway. So be assessed by people and companies who are making their own headsets and augmented reality glasses. the Apples and the Metas, there's quite a few that are more some of these more niche use cases that are coming out. And we're targeting some of those to see if we can get our system into some of these more, I guess, less consumer-facing applications.
So, as you said, the insert on like in between the eye and like the system, that's still like in development. So, how do you balance just obviously the developing of the product, but also just the reaching out, networking, and business side of all of it?
Yeah, it's definitely a hard balance. You know, big thing for most startups that you'll probably talk to is funding, getting the funding in. Something that, you know, I was so new to the startup world and to the business space that when I first started the company, I didn't realize how much harder it would be to build a hardware company versus a software company. You know, I could think through intuitively, but it does take a lot of money to build a hardware company because you've got to iterate with prototypes, you've got to have people test it out on site and things like that, to where funding is a really big part of it. So we apply to a lot of grants. We're also looking at potential investors. And so that's a big part of making sure that you can actually get the development underway to where you can start to have some of these partnership conversations as you're developing. And so it's definitely a balance between the two. My background in engineering, it's been kind of hard to let go of doing the development myself. You know, I built some of the first prototypes, but I'm now in a much more, you know, leadership managerial role across different contractors, different people in our labs, to make sure that the technology is being built effectively, and also to bring in the money to make sure that we can keep building.
Yeah, I mean, I never realized that the difference between hardware and software because, yeah, as you said, hardware you have to have like physical production, you have to do like actual testing. While I guess in software, everything is virtual, so you can just like make another copy, I guess, and then just reiterate through that.
Exactly, yeah. And with AI, it's so much quicker to iterate as well. You know, you can get some early feedback from customers, send them out an email, have them test out the system, and then come back and iterate pretty quickly. But that is far from the case in hardware, where you have not only the supplier timelines to get your devices and your components in, but then also the manufacturing and shipping out to people and getting their feedback and troubleshooting. So there's a number of different layers that go into hardware development that are just much easier to bypass with software.
Yeah. I mean, like I've seen a lot of like, you know, this like startups and people. I never realized like just the difference between like how the different product can like just completely change how like the business itself functions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there are a lot of investors that only invest in software solutions. It's especially for hardware, you know, you have to make sure the investor is aligned with the timeline of hardware, but then also the industry that you want to go into. And so when you're thinking about these funding sources, it also can be a very different navigation approach to looking into the different investors that could support you, different grant types that have, you know, follow-on funding that can continue to fund the development, which is not always the case or needed for software quite as heavily.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, wait, this is gonna go off to a random side tangent, but like, how did you just get into like, you know, first you mentioned that you started off with like Carolina Instruments as like a research part. So how did you get into that and why that lab, I guess, if that makes sense? Like, why did you decide to go through with the product and continue on?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I'd done quite a bit of research through like late high school and then early college. And at that time, I was doing a lot of human performance and biomechanics work. So looking at, you know, the way that people walk, the ways that I actually was in a fall prevention lab. And so we were looking at the different layers of what causes someone to fall and how we can prevent that with some, you know, additional biomedical engineering measures. And what disappointed me in that research is that a lot of the time our conclusions were, oh, well, we need to understand more about the like neuroscience and the underlying mechanics of the, I guess, neurological things that contribute to these movements. And so that was what I was seeing a lot across the field, is that there's really such a large overlap between neuroscience and the body and the way that we move, that I was still really enjoying the space. I think it's a fascinating area to work in. I have a lot of love for biomechanics and prosthetics work. But at that time, I just finished up a paper where I was like, man, my conclusion is just that we need to know more about the brain. And again, it was kind of the perfect storm where I was in a biomedical engineering class, and my now co-founder, the PI of the engineering lab, came in and did a talk. And I think that this really speaks to the value of talking to the people and the professors that you are working in an area that you have interest in. Because afterwards, I went up to him and talked to him, and his talk wasn't even on this technology. He was actually talking about making 3D holograms with lasers. And so his work prior to this technology was very much around building these systems that can be used to stimulate neurons. It gets a little bit technical, but the laser-based systems that a lot of neuroscientists use, you need to kind of hit the neurons with a very specific like geometry and then also timing, to where he had done a lot of work around building these holograms at a very small scale. And so that's what his work was on. And I was just kind of fascinated by it and curious to talk to him more. I also distinctly remember, he's gonna laugh at me for telling the story, but I remember him tripping over a stool when he was first coming in, and he was just funny about the way that he dealt with it. And I felt like he was gonna be a fun person to talk to as well. And I'm glad that I did that for that reason, because he is a great person to work with and he's a very fun personality. And so I went up and talked to him after because he felt very approachable to me. And that's when he started telling me about the project with the eye tracking technology that they had just freshly ideated. And he was a pretty new PI, so he had started his lab in 2019. This was in 2022 when I met him. And so he was still kind of building up his group of researchers. And when I expressed interest in it and was asking questions about it, he invited me to join his lab. And so I actually just switched over from the lab that I was in into his lab. And I knew that he had a pretty strong collaboration with a neuroscience researcher who did behavioral neuroscience research, so looking at the ways that people engage with the world. And it felt very aligned with addressing some of the confusion and frustrations that I had in the biomechanics space, where, why is it that the brain acts in the way that it does? And so from there, it was really just, how quickly can I get into this lab and start working on this project? And again, I was very fortunate to come in at the time that I did and be able to get the hands-on experience of building the first versions of the technology.
Wait, that's really cool. So you joined a lab, and the lab was essentially about like learning, activating like the neurons and learning more about them.
Yeah, so the collaboration, or the way a lot of labs work, because we have the engineering lab and then we also have the behavioral neuroscience. The point of the engineering lab is not to answer hypothesis-based questions, as a lot of science labs do. It's really to build tools to help make the neuroscience research more efficient and more effective. And so with that, they are constantly building and iterating on tools for different experiences. We have a number of different devices that we've created in the lab, but this eye tracking technology is the one with the most commercial potential. And so their dynamic is very much a mutual benefit, because if we're able to build technologies that help increase the capabilities of neuroscience research and move forward from that, then it's kind of a joint effort just to push those concepts forward. And so I liked that as well, as it was very unique structure to have for a lab as an engineer, to get the opportunity to just build hands-on and iterate and work with neuroscientists to understand their needs more.
So it's kind of like a cycle in a way, because like the tools that engineers make, like research labs can also use that, and the questions that the research labs propose, engineers can build off of that and make products and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, we've done quite a bit of building on top of projects that we've approached, and building new devices to help explore things that other devices have helped reveal. And so it definitely is very cyclic. And then even within one device cycle, we're constantly going back and having the engineer or the neuroscientist test the device and give us feedback, and then bring them another version. And so there's a lot of cyclic behavior within our group for sure.
Wait, this is kind of a random question, but if you had to like choose, which one would you choose? Would you consider yourself like a scientist, like those research labs, or would you consider yourself more like an engineer, like the engineering?
I was definitely heavier on the engineering because of the way that I joined the lab. So I started off as a research scientist, building within the engineering group. But I think that for both, it's kind of a hard question, because you do have to have a certain level of both within each lab. So even our neuroscientists have some great engineering skills, because they, if there's something that's small, that's off real quick, that they can just take over to an electronic station and rewire something real quickly. It's very beneficial to not have to, have an engineer come over and take it back to the engineering space. And so I think that they overlap a lot more than you would expect. These are a lot of really smart and motivated scientists in general that make up this group. And so the ability to kind of work across both is definitely important for understanding the bigger context and goal of the labs. And so I think that I fall more on the engineering side, but at the same time, I did a lot of the neuroscience work and got trained on all the work that they do as well, just so that I could better understand what my technology is being used for. And I think that that's an important mindset to have when you're working in an interdisciplinary group. Is you don't have to be the master of everything, but you do need to understand, what the implications are for the technology that you're building. And a lot of times it's kind of putting yourself in the shoes of the person that's going to use it, or the person that's building it.
So I'm assuming that also involves a lot of just like communicating and just like talking with people and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I think
Sorry, I can go on about that for just a second. I think that was something that I quickly realized was one of my skill sets, and that I think made me confident enough to try to pursue the company route and the startup route, is because, there's a lot of really smart scientists, and I recognized that the ones that were really able to move efficiently and effectively were the ones that could communicate their work and their problems well. And I've always been a big talker, if you couldn't tell. And I think that I kind of saw that my ability to talk to people and connect with people across both of the groups was really helping push our project forward. And, the same is true for talking to your customers and taking that mentality into being able to communicate the value of your technology outside of the research too. So communication is definitely a very valuable skill in the scientific and engineering world. And I think that it's just going to become more valuable as we have access to AI to be able to help solve some of the more heads down problems, but we still have to be able to communicate with each other.
I was essentially going to ask you answered my question. Basically, I was going to ask more like me personally, when I'm just like reading any scientific paper, there's so much like jargon, and then you also hear like people talking about how scientists, they don't know how to communicate effectively. So I was gonna ask about that, which you kind of answered already.
Yeah, well, I mean, it definitely was something that I was working on in the labs, but I still, when I got out of the labs and started working on the company, I realized that I was still way too deep in the scientific jargon and focusing in on here's what our technology can do. When you're out in the real world, people don't really care as much about how the technology actually works and all of the, interesting things to an engineer about the systems that you put in place to make it better. All they really want to know is what does it enable to a customer? And so it was really difficult for me at first to nail down our story and basically communicate to people who are outside of research how and why our technology can be applied to these spaces where it matters. And that meant letting go of some of those cool engineering components that I was really tied to.
Wait, let me think. Do I have any? Well, I guess this is a classic question, but if you had to give any advice to your past self, or just like any high schooler, I guess, what a piece of advice would you give?
That's a fun one. So if I think to my high school self, I think it would definitely be there are no dumb questions, and usually the smartest person in the room is the one that's not scared to ask questions. I think that, as I was getting comfortable in the research space, exploring different labs, when you move to a new environment, there's all these people that are experts in that space. And it's easy as a younger scientist who doesn't have as much experience to just kind of keep your mouth shut and not ask too many questions and just kind of try to learn from everyone. But all of my learning has come from just being fearless and asking questions. And sure, some of them are probably dumb, but you'll find that a lot of the people that you're asking those questions to also don't believe in dumb questions and want you to ask questions. And then a lot of the time you're bringing a fresh perspective to their work and to something that they've never thought of before and can be valuable just for the questions that you ask. And so that would be my main piece of advice is I ask questions all the time now. I'm constantly, in spaces where I'm just trying to learn and understand. I think a good example is like how to fundraise for a company, how to set up all of our finances. And these are things that I wouldn't be able to do well in the company if I wasn't asking the basic questions to the people who are experts. And so for me, a lot of like getting past that ego and being confident enough to be transparent about the things that you don't understand, because everybody is not going to understand everything. And it's really valuable to have somebody on the team who will ask the questions that come to their mind.
I think like a big reason why people don't necessarily ask questions is that they're scared, like, oh, they're gonna judge me or anything like that. But I think that's just kind of like an anxiety type of thing. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that, it takes a little bit to get over that hill of being nervous of how people are going to respond. But I think that you'll find, and you're clearly doing a good job of asking questions already, but I think that you'll find that when you're in that context, and even if you're saying a question and you're like, oh, like I should have known that as you're saying it, you'll find that people don't respond in the ways that all of your mentality can make you think that they will. They're not going to say, oh, like, why would you even ask that? It's often just, oh yeah, like, let me fill you in on this component. And in that case, that's the worst case scenario of asking a question where maybe you should have known, but then people help fill you into where you need to be. And I think that that's a good outcome as well. And so it's just kind of overcoming that fear. And a lot of the time you'll find that people are very glad that you ask questions and are transparent about the things that you don't know, versus just smiling and nodding and trying to fill in those gaps on your own.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think like for example, in school, when I ask questions to my teacher, sometimes I'm just like, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask. I think I've asked this like my fifth question, but you know what? I'll go ahead and ask again.
Yeah, good for you. And I'm sure that they're glad to see their students engaging in that way as well. I don't know that I have a single memory of someone being like, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't ask as many questions as you do." You know, it's a good trait to have.
I think anyone had another question I wanted to ask. Wait, okay. Yeah, there we go. Just like looking into the future, what do you expect to see out of Carolina Instruments and just like what are your plans for the future, I guess? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's something that's been relatively new to me when starting the company is that the research project, you always have an idea of what that near term next step is. It's like, okay, we're going to see how this technology works and what this study finds, and then we'll go and explore from that. In the startup space, you know, there's all kinds of different levels and layers to how far out in the future your goals are. And you're constantly iterating and pivoting on them based on the things that are happening, but there's a lot more stage planning of those next milestones than I found in research because, you know, everything is usually up to how studies go. Still the case in the company context, but you have to have a lot more foresight down the road for what you want to happen. So for us, the near-term milestone in the next 12 to 18 months is to finish that insert that I was describing that goes into the VR headsets, run those into their early studies and pilots and get some of that early data, and then engage with some of our early potential partners that are manufacturers of the smart eyewear. That's a near-term goal, and that's the one that I'm focused in on right now because, you know, when you're a startup, you have to really be intentional about the way that you allocate your resources and your time. And it's very much, you know, recognizing what needs to happen to get to the next near-term goal, but then also the broader, how does that play into the long-term application and commercialization of the technology and the company's growth? So beyond that, you know, I'm having some early conversations with potential partners and starting to explore what the best applications for our technology could be once we do have the integration capabilities and the data set built out. And also even considering things all the way down to FDA approvals and requirements and timelines for our technology. So there's a lot down the road that is impacted by what we're doing now, but still having an idea of, you know, do we want to be a measurement platform to enable others to go and take this technology down FDA routes for different applications? Because, you know, the eyes are such a rich data set and data stream that is relatively new to have access to in a wearable context that if we want to be the ones to take and see it be used for, you know, one of these neurological conditions that I named earlier, you can really only do one. It takes a lot of money to go down the FDA pathway and a lot of time. And it's just not realistic as a small company, but as a company in general, to explore all of the different applications that it could be used for in a clinical space. So for me, it's been a lot of strategizing around how do we best position ourselves to make sure that we can broadly expand the clinical access that we want to expand, but not just spend all of our money and resources on one pathway. So it's definitely a balance between that and looking towards what our options are with partnering with different groups, different approaches that other companies are taking. There's definitely going to be a lot of teamwork and collaboration across the field to make something like this happen. And so that's where that longer term foresight comes in is, yes, right now we're looking at integrating into the smart eyewear, but then longer term, what are these considerations that we need to see it really be used in alignment with our mission? And that's something that I've been focusing a lot on is that mission alignment, because you want to stay aligned with you know, what motivates you as a startup and for me as someone who's early on in my career, it's going to be a long run to get to that space. And if I go off in a different direction where maybe the market is a little bit less barriers to get into it, but I'm not interested in the space where it would be applied, then it's not going to be my full effort that it could be if I was just 100% passion project. This is my mission and this is what I want to do. So I think that there's a lot of different variables that go into weighing those longer term goals. And that's something that I'm still learning along the way as well. I talked to a lot of advisors about this.
I guess going off that, you talked about how you had to identify which goals are like most realistic for you and just like identify them and work for them. I think how do you go about just figuring out exactly like, okay, these are the goals that I'm going to focus on now, and these are my long-term goals.
Yeah, a lot of mapping out where you are in the stage of development, what funding you have available to you, and then also what opportunities you have at different stages of each of those. So this is kind of what I was mentioning when I said, you know, you don't have to do this level of like future prep when you're in the research lab. And so for me, it's been so much of just making sure that I visually and myself have a good understanding of where our company will be at all of these stages and contingency planning for if we do get a grant or don't get a grant, or if one part of development takes longer than expected. And so there's all of these variables that can change that timeline. And so I think the really important thing is understanding which milestones can be achievable within a specific timeline, considering all of these different contingency options and variations that could happen. And so for us, extended reality is also a technical benefit as well. If we have our system in the virtual reality headset, we know exactly what someone is looking at. And so that was a strategic decision on our behalf, because it makes it easier for us to develop out that first system, start getting some money in and get some data on the performance before having to navigate, having an outward facing camera, for example, and understanding where someone is looking in less controlled environment. And so we're working towards that, but kind of defining and breaking down your long-term goals into chunks like that, where it is feasible to reach a milestone, even when there are some contingency plans that have to come into play there.
That makes sense. I think a lot of times, at least for me, like I lose sight of what I actually want to do, and then I'm just like I get caught up in like the big goal. I'm like, wait, what am I supposed to do now? So yeah.
It's human. You have this idea and this vision for what you want to happen, and it's honestly been very hard for me. I've had to turn down like a couple of really great opportunities to present to biotech people, to clinical specialists, and I just recognize that right now my goal is to build this technology and to see it get to this next stage where we need to get this data set. It's essential for us to get to that long-term goal, and just recognizing that some of these milestones that maybe feel like a little nearsighted are necessary to get to the stage where you can see the vision really come into play. And it takes a little bit of self-restraint sometimes to not, dive into some of these FDA conversations and things like that. But the reality is we're just a little premature for that, and we need to build first.
Yeah, I think being able to identify like not choosing to do something is also pretty important, because I feel like a lot of times I just end up like, oh, let me just do all of this, and I regret it because I'm like, I don't have the skills right now to take advantage of this as much as I could have.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. And I experience that a lot in my day-to-day as well. I have a to-do list that if I worked all day, every day for the next year and a half, I would never get it done. And so it's like the need to really be intentional about the way that I'm using my time and prioritize the tasks that I'm doing is bigger now than ever. I think a good example is I always see myself as someone who's very appreciative and supportive of the people who also support me, people who reach out to me and want to engage with the work that I'm doing. It's incredibly flattering, and it's human to want to say, oh, thank you so much. This is like, I really appreciate it. It's fantastic. And here's how it's going. But I'm starting to realize if I do that all day, I'm not going to get anything done. And then I'm not going to have anything to talk about. And so there's also a component of letting go of this idea of, I have to be this person that's showing up and responding to people with the same amount of energy and engagement that they give me. Even though I'm incredibly appreciative, nothing has changed there. I need to be intentional about the way that I prioritize my time. And it's hard sometimes, but that's part, I think, being a good worker and a good, founder and employee is making sure that you know what needs to happen to make those goals come true. And sometimes that's cutting out the things that are more enjoyable in the near term, but don't help you get towards that longer goal.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think being intentional is like really important, but sometimes it's like really tricky, especially if there's a lot of goals or a lot of things that you just want to do for fun, or like you just want to do, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially for somebody who has a lot of hobbies and a lot of interests, it can be easy to get off track like that. I definitely have found myself guilty of it. I'm not perfect by any means, but I do at least think about it when I'm scheduling my calendar and making my to-do list for the day.
Makes sense. I guess we can just to like last wrapping up type of question. What's just one lesson, I guess, that you've learned from being in like the entrepreneurship side, but also just in the research and engineering side of things?
Yeah, I think on the entrepreneurship side, a pretty recent one that I've been learning is, I mentioned that there's a lot of people that are reaching out and ready to support me. We've won a couple of competitions recently, and it's exciting to see the momentum that's coming up with the technology and with the company. But there are so many people that are reaching out with their thoughts and expertise and services that when I first got started, I was really looking to talk to anybody that would talk to me. I just wanted to learn and was trying to be a sponge and really take in the knowledge of people within the space who had experience. But I've been doing that for over a year now, and I'm realizing that with me narrowing down on this near-term goal, I really, and I think that this is my piece of advice, is that you need to be intentional about how many people you're getting input from and how much time you're spending getting input from different people, versus, taking the input that you have and just building with it. And it's very difficult when you are someone with a curious mindset that likes to ask questions to, even turn down an opportunity to talk to someone with a great skill set that you could learn from. But what I'm realizing recently is that I have too many advisors, and what a great problem to have. But I'm working on narrowing down how many people are in my ear with their expertise, because otherwise it can really kind of cause some decision paralysis, because everyone has different perspectives, everyone has different experience. And for me, it's now I'm realizing to, find your core set of people that have skill sets that you need support in and you want to be filled, and then pull from those people. And if you have to go outside of that and you recognize that in some conversation, great, go ahead and do it. But for me, it's like, let me narrow down the amount of time that I'm spending just talking to people and then weighing all of these dozens of different perspectives, and find a few key people that I really trust and respect and are experts in their space, and then just lean into that expertise to then make my informed decisions, so I don't have as many points to be pulling from. And then what was the other part of that question? Was there a second piece to it?
I mean, I guess just an extension, but with the research and engineering aspect of it as well.
Yeah, I think the research and engineering aspect was also very much in not being, it's a little bit flipped from the question of like not being scared to ask dumb questions, but like, don't be scared to make a terrible device. I think that it's surprising to hear as an engineer, but if you release a perfect product when you're done with it, that means that you waited too long. That could have been in the hands of people far, far earlier than it was. And I think that it's really important to find people who are ready to try and test your technology early on, because then you can get feedback on exactly the types of things that you need to change to make it useful for them, versus trying to create this perfect product, put a bow on it, hand it over to them, and then they say, oh, wait, this kind of missed the mark a little bit. And now you're, months down the drain and a ton of work, and you just actually haven't delivered a pivot and redesign when you're earlier on in those prototypes. And so don't be scared to hand somebody something that's duct taped and glued together and just have them give you some feedback on it and tell them that that it's an early prototype. But I think that for me, when I was first getting started, I was so nervous about how the neuroscientists were going to respond to some of my early devices. And, is this something that they can even use? And in reality, a lot of the time, it saved me so much time and effort, because I might have been heading in a slightly different direction than I should have been. And by putting it in front of them early, it allowed me to really quickly change the things that needed to change and then fix it in the next iteration. And so that's my biggest piece of advice to engineers, is don't be scared to have somebody try an ugly product, because it's going to help them get what they need in the long term. And a lot of people understand that when they work with prototypes and engineers.
I mean, that's actually some really good advice, because a lot of times I just struggle with like, oh, it just needs to be perfect and everything. But like, if you take the time to get advice, you can just refine it and make sure that your product or whatever addresses the problem.
Yep, exactly. And it all comes into the confidence. It's hard to put something in front of someone that you've created. I've been a perfectionist for many years, and I understand the desire to just, make sure that it's perfectly built, it's perfectly portrayed and given to them with a really nice front end on it. But I think that getting over the idea of people perceiving me as a bad engineer by putting something a little rough in front of them has been really helpful, because every engineer starts with an ugly prototype, and that's the reality of it.
That is encouraging. Yes. Thank you so much for joining me and just answering my questions and just sharing your insight. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to see what the other things you end up building. Like I said, I've been seeing some of your work on LinkedIn. I think that it's so exciting to see you on it so early. I wasn't building, tangible products until I got into college. And so good for you for really starting early and learning from people who have done it for a few years. I think it's great.
Yeah. It's been really cool just like talking to people who have like really advanced, not maybe I guess not advanced, but just really know a lot about their area of expertise, like you, I guess, and just like getting advice from them. It's been really cool.
Well, I appreciate that. It's been funny for me to be in the chair of telling people about my expertise and my experience, because I was just in your shoes not long ago, and I still am in your shoes in a lot of calls where I'm trying to learn from people. And I think that the people who are wanting to ask questions from those that have years of experience in their space are the ones that gain the knowledge and the expertise to be in their chair later on. So I'm sure that you'll have some people reaching out to you in a few years asking for your knowledge as well.
For sure, yeah.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye.